This week we're going to be looking at another Hasegawa kit, in particular their KI61-1 Type 3 fighter in 1/32 scale, with markings for series Shidenkai no Maki. Now, one thing this kit does come with, and unfortunately I'm not going to open it up as I worry about the parts getting loose and potentially getting damaged, is a set of resin figures in 1/32 scale for both a Sid pilot and also a freestanding one. So it's a nice little inclusion. Detailing is adequate for these, but I digress a little. So, starting with the clear parts. The casting on these parts are excellent. You can vary for the right thickness and do a great job. However, one thing I noticed is that there's almost no framing to them. Where you would expect to have the actual frame material, there is none, which is a bit disappointing, as especially in this larger scale, that's something you would want as far as the detailing, to have that separation between the actual glass and the framing. So that's a little bit of a disappointment out of the gate. Next up, we've got one of the fuel tanks, main gear, radiator block, and a couple other little detail pieces, as well as two of the prop blades. These are all nicely cast, no ejector pin marks, no flashing, and the detail on them is pretty nice. Now, this is the real area that tells you this is 1/32 scale, is our fuselage halves, as they are obviously quite large since this is a larger scale aircraft. I normally work in 1/48, but this is one of those exceptions to be made. Detail and molding is Hasegawa quality. It's sharp. It's very nicely done. The various, excuse me. Sorry, a little gas there. I've got the upper cowling here, as well as the gun ports. Interestingly, they molded where you stick in the barrels at different lengths. Obviously, with it being two different guns at different staggered in how they're placed, it would have possibly made sense, just since you're really not going to be seeing that part, just have them equal length and just adjust the length of the barrel. But just an interesting aside I wanted to point out. Now, one thing that I did find as a pretty significant issue, even though thankfully it's not an issue on the main gear doors here, is there is a decent amount of ejector pinning. Fortunately, with how the construction goes, and we'll see that later when we get to the instructions, a lot of that's going to be covered up or simply not be seen. So thankfully, it's not as bad as the F8 we looked at last time. But still, it's a little disconcerting. Alright, continuing on, we've got a lot of detailing pieces, as well as another mirror of that first spur we looked at. Below that, we've got some cockpit parts, some control mechanisms, tail gear, and some other odds and end detail parts for cockpit controls and other small detail parts that go into there. Now, one thing this kit does include is a standard figure in addition to the resin one included. Obviously, for this particular one, you're not going to use that, but it's nice that they do include it. So if you get the standard version, know that it does include a pilot figure. Excuse me. Now, one thing I noticed, and this is a big disappointment, is the exhaust nozzles are all solid. You would think on a larger 1/32 scale they would have them open, since you'd actually be able to see that detail. So that would be something, unfortunately, if you wanted to get a more accurate, you'd have to go aftermarket or go through the pain of opening it up yourself. Cockpit sidewalls are nicely detailed. Some of the detailing could be a little nice, could be a little sharper, but it's within reason. And should take the detailing nicely if you choose to do so. Otherwise, it's fine to leave as is. It's passable. Cockpit tub parts as well. Back rest, our large spinner up front, and various odds and ends, as well as our main gear. Again, coming from 1/48 scale, 1/48 scale would probably be about that size for the whole thing. So seeing it almost about twice the size is interesting to see. And last but not least, we have our wing halves. I mean, again, the fact that I'm having to move this all the way back to get in frame is impressive and just gives it a nice look as well. Detail is great. Can't complain too much. They do include some ribbing in here, so in case you decide to display with the flaps deployed. I don't believe they include parts for you to do that, but nice that they give you that out of the gate, so should you choose to do so. Okay, moving on to the decal sheet. So you have markings for a single aircraft. You also include these character decals, much akin to some of the Grills and Panzer kits that we've looked at before. Also include decals for instrument panel. So I would say, if anything, in this scale, they're not quite as useful. If anything, I would say if you want to go that sort of route, you're better off spending a little extra and getting a aftermarket set, or just painting on yourself. But overall, they're nicely printed. Sharp colors are bright and in register. So very nice job there. Moving on to the instruction sheet. Now, one thing that surprised me was that they do include a lot of the English translations on this, which is something that the Girls and Panzer kits don't have. So having that in here was a nice touch on Hasegawa's part. They didn't have to do it, but the fact that they chose to do so, I gotta give them props for that. So, starting out, we have the assembly and painting instructions for both of the figures, whether standing or seated. Moving on, we go into the cockpit area. Assembly here has some challenge just because of the part count, but overall it's pretty straightforward, and the assembly sequence is not too difficult. I kept it pretty straightforward, so there should not be any real sort of gotchas or challenges. And overall, it's a pretty straightforward and simple build. Aside from, like I said, those couple of small areas, it's not all that complex, fortunately. And if you've really built most kits, you should be fine. One thing also to note is the fact that they do include these large runners to connect the wings to, as given the size, it's definitely going to need it. Moving on to our paint instructions, as I said, single aircraft option, overall in silver with greenish blotching markings for camouflage. Overall, not a whole lot to say there. In comparison to the kit we looked at last week, this is a lot better outing on Hasegawa's part. It seems less like they went with the bottom of the barrel and actually did do a decent job on this kit. Again, as I said in that video, it could just be that I gotta add a box, but overall this kit looks like it would be a pretty fun one. And as I said, I don't normally work in 1/32 scale. In fact, this potentially, now that I think about it, this probably would be my first 1/32 scale kit that I'd actually put together. depending on, if I choose to do this one. I've got one or two others lying around that may get moved around the build queue. It's one of those things. But yeah, definitely this is one to consider. Even just the base version instead of going with this one, as it's a well-engineered kit. It looks like it should go together without any real hiccups. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kit. So that was a look at Hasegawa's 1/32 scale KI61 Type 3 fighter and markings for series Shidenkai no Maki. Until next time.